This is Ashishar Bedekar and welcome to my podcast, The ARB Show. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Prechard. Prechard is an impact entrepreneur based in Africa. He is a 2023 Obama Foundation leader. Prechard is passionate about promoting entrepreneurship and clean energy in Africa. He is the CCO of Engineering Zimbabwe EPC, a renewable energy development company operating in Southern Africa. Through his renewable energy business, he's working to mainstream the use of renewables in solving our society's most pressing challenge. Prechard also doubles up as a strategy, innovation, and enterprise development consultant with his bespoke strategy consulting firm, where he promotes innovative entrepreneurship in Africa. Welcome to the show, Prechard. Do share your life journey and your vision for Africa.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Glad to be joining you on this podcast.
Thank you. So do share about your life journey so far and how you got into EPC, renewable energy in a brief, and then we can talk about the various topic of the discussion.
Awesome, thank you. So I think my passion for renewable energy was birthed from the realization that Africa's most pressing challenges can be solved by entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, I think, is the great enabler of everything that Africa needs at this point in time. I think Africa has been at the receiving end of aid. We've been receiving a lot of aid, but that aid continues to come through and not necessarily transform economies. So for me, the first thing that I got involved in was entrepreneurship, and I realized entrepreneurship was the ability to unlock Africa's potential. But for that entrepreneurship to thrive, I think there was a need for it to have access to energy. I think power and energy anchors any economic development and entrepreneurship in general. So for me, it's the relationship between energy and entrepreneurship that has gotten me into this space. Hence, I run an EPCM business where we are building renewable energy assets and hopefully helping Africa to transition from economic backwaters into a space where it can thrive. I have been an entrepreneur for as long as I can remember, but I only became a full-time entrepreneur when I quit corporate 5 years ago, and I got fully immersed into the entrepreneurship space. It has had its own ups and downs, but I remain optimistic that my work as an entrepreneur as well as someone who supports other entrepreneurs will not go in vain. I am fully convinced that my work will, make some sort of a contribution towards the Africa we want. Thank you.
Great. And also another exciting point which if you'd like to cover is how you became the Obama Foundation leader, and especially your post where you talked to President Obama in your native language. That was pretty exciting. So maybe just a few lines on that.
Awesome. So I consider myself an ambassador, not only of my country, but of the African continent as a whole. And I am extremely passionate about, Africa's progress. I'm extremely passionate about seeing Africa and my own country, Zimbabwe, progress and move forward. And for me, I felt when I got that opportunity to meet with the President Obama, I felt what better way to greet him than to greet him with my native language and represent my culture in the room. And so how did I get involved with the Obama Foundation? Well, I was selected as one of the 35 Africans in 2023. And part of a 105, a network of 105 young leaders who were selected from across the world. I think my selection was in line with the work that I do in renewable energy, as well as the work that I do in promoting innovative entrepreneurship. So it was quite an exciting moment for me to be meeting with President Obama and shaking his hand and greeting him with my native language and hearing him speak and just to tap into his wisdom. So yeah, that was an exciting moment for me.
Wow, excellent. Thank you, Prechard. So as I discussed, we like to have a format in which the guest talks about the top 5 areas in his or her area of expertise. And given the fact that you're doing really some great stuff in the African entrepreneurship and startup ecosystem, I would request you to talk about the top 5 African startup ecosystem trends, which would be useful for the audience and also open up the eyes in terms of the potential of entrepreneurship and Africa opportunities in general. Over to you, Prechard.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about the entrepreneurial landscape, which will include obviously the startups and the 5 key issues that are happening there. I think for me, the first issue, number one, is that Africa is trending. And I don't mean this as a cliche. It's not just trending because of the growth in population. It's not just trending because of how Africa is evolving and claiming its place in the global economic landscape. It's also trending because African ideas are beginning to take shape and be embraced worldwide. I think we have seen in recent years companies such as Lyft. I love Lyft so much because the founder of Lyft, when he came to Zimbabwe, saw our transportation system and he was fascinated by it. And when he got back to the US, he founded an entity called Zimride. And Zimride was his own way to dedicate his startup to Zimbabwe, Zim, which is where he had gotten the idea. So Africa is trending in that way that African ideas are beginning to be accepted and embraced in the international world as being valuable, as being ideas that can actually be utilized. The old approach was always that Africa was at the receiving end of ideas, but now Africa is beginning to share its ideas. And I think earlier on, before the start of the call, we were talking about M-Pesa as an example, which was a breakthrough innovation in the mobile money space that has since been embraced by the rest of the world. I think the rest of the world is actually trailing behind Africa when it comes to embracing mobile money because of an idea that came through from Africa. So I think Africa is trending because of the ideas. Africa is trending because it's taking a spotlight beyond just looking at Africa as an aid continent where we are always holding on to begging boughs. Africa is trending because our ideas, our culture, and a lot of the things that traditionally were not viewed as being important are beginning to find their place in the global world. We may not be as advanced as is portrayed on that movie Wakanda, but definitely there's some advances that are taking place that's putting Africa in a position where it can earn its place. And talk about population growth, for example. Africa is one of the fastest growing continents. It's actually the youngest continent in the world, and we look set to have a place where we can contribute economically, technologically, and in many ways than traditionally viewed in the past.
Great, Prachad. That's very true. And in fact, if you look at it, Africa is the mother continent of humanity, right? So if you look at paleoanthropology and so, there were few proto humans who decided to migrate from somewhere in, I think, nearby Tanzania, if I getting my history correct, and then they migrated out of Africa, right? So from that perspective, it's great that even now ideas from Africa will go across the world. And interestingly, if you look at technology, there are many terms which are anyway used, right? For example, if you look at the Linux distribution, right? Ubuntu is a very popular kind of a distribution, and that's come from I think it's a Tanzanian term or some of the term, but it's African language term, right? I think it's a Swahili word which says coming together or something like that, right? So that's really nice.
It's a Bantu. Yeah, so okay. It's a Bantu. Ubuntu is a Bantu which speaks to culture. And Mark Shuttleworth, a South African, is the guy who built the Ubuntu platform, I think.
Excellent, excellent, great. So I think that's a very valid point that any global players, anyone who's looking at technology, business, etc., should definitely look at Africa as a huge opportunity, untapped opportunity, but which, if planned well, can really lead to a great opportunity from business perspective in the coming years. So that's a very valid point. So, what would be your second trend which you see in the African startup or entrepreneurship ecosystem?
All right. So just to before maybe I jump into the second one, I will mention Africa as a continent, but obviously Africa is 54 different countries that have their own unique cultures and their own unique ways of viewing things and their own unique possibilities and opportunities that exist. My second thought is that Africa is bootstrapping. If you look at the African entrepreneurial ecosystem, it is still in its infancy. There's a lot that can be done that is yet to be done. As a result, the rest of the world does not view the African entrepreneurial ecosystem or African entrepreneurial landscape as being worth their resources. So what am I saying? If you consider the funding that has gone into startups over the past 4 years in the US, for example, the US has funded its own startups to the tune of almost 1 trillion United States dollars over the past 4 years. China has funded its own startups to the tune of almost about $250 billion over the past 4 years. But if you look at Africa in terms of startup funding, over the past 4 years, it's around $10 billion, which is a very small fraction of the funding that is going into the startups. So pretty much African ideas, African startups, African innovations are bootstrapping to find their way to market. And that means there's a lot of constraint as a result. But those that do end up making it, they actually make it on the basis of fundamentals. They're not overfunded. They are not doing this because there's a long runway of Series A, Series B, and a lot of funding that's just coming their way. They're actually doing it because they've built something that works and they're in a space where, with limited resources, they're making it work. So that's the second thing that I can mention about the African startup as well as entrepreneurial landscape.
Right, a very valid point. So, in fact, what you said is true, right? Because whatever bootstrapping you do with a startup, and when the startup becomes successful, it's already seen and developed its whole business process, its product, etc., in a constrained environment, right? So even when you have got adequate resources, and if the same kind of a frugal innovation mindset is taken, then it's surely, there's a lot which can be done. What would be your third outlook or third trend which you see when it comes to the African startup ecosystem?
I think the third thing is that Africa is a gold mine for opportunity. Why? Because African opportunities, all kinds of opportunities, are undervalued. The rest of the world has figured a way of valuing its resources. The rest of the world has figured a way of valuing its startups, its economies, and a lot of things. But a lot of things in Africa are still undervalued. Why? Because I think value is mostly a narrative issue. And, during the start of our conversation, I mentioned issues around aid. That's how Africa has been viewed. So as a result, any resources you can think of that are in Africa, Africa is home to a third of the world's mineral resources. You talk about, for example, platinum. Africa has got 90% of, the world's platinum resources, 60% of the world's arable land. There's a lot of resources that are undervalued. Even their skills and talents are undervalued. You've got programmers in Africa, you've got engineers in Africa, you've got doctors even in Africa who are going to work in markets such as the UK. But when they're in Africa, they're undervalued. So it is a very big opportunity for the rest of the world to start looking at Africa as a place where they can come and set up their businesses. Why? because the resources are not going to be as expensive as they would be in say, other very developed continents. So that is a big trend. Africa's resources are undervalued, whether these are human capital resources, whether these are natural resources or constructed resources, or any kind of resources you can imagine. They're undervalued primarily on the premise of one narrative, but also, because of other factors and the stage at which we are in our various jurisdictions from Cape to Cairo in terms of economic development.
Got it. Yeah, but at the same time, what you said can be seen in a different light as well. So smart global businessmen, smart global entrepreneurs, etc., should definitely look at Africa as a great opportunity, because it is undervalued right now, right? Which means there's a lot of potential to grow and really, get the kind of right opportunities. Yeah. What would be your fourth trend in your perspective, Prechard?
Sorry. So the fourth perspective is that I think Africa is embracing new technologies faster than imagined. You would view Africa generally as being economic backward, even though there are countries inside Africa that have excelled in many ways. I mean, you talk about your Egypt, your Mauritius, and so forth. But Africa in general is beginning to embrace new technologies way faster than reported. I think in the past it was difficult for Africa to onboard technologies because of so many barriers that existed then. But now you see that, we were talking about mobile money as an example. That is a true testament of how quickly and how fast Africans are embracing technology. Internet connectivity is still a challenge, yes, but over 40% of Africans have got access to internet. So that tells you that you can now start to build solutions for the future. When you're looking at the African landscape, it's no longer just a very historical, very manual, and the very old school way of doing things. There are so many technologies in ed tech, health tech, you name it, that are being embraced. But most importantly, they're not just being embraced, they're actually being developed. Where, in instances where people cannot afford to buy certain technologies from outside Africa, they're actually building their own technologies. I mean, you find, for example, in Uganda, they built the Kira EV electric vehicle some over 10 years ago, right? So they've been toying around with the idea of electric vehicles for years, and we've been seeing all of these things happen. And I'll give you an example. Over the past 2 years, they have built solar-powered water treatment plant. These are technologies that we are building on our own here in Africa to try and answer to some of the challenges that are happening. So technology is playing a key part in Africa's renaissance, and technology is being embraced at a relatively faster pace than is being reported.
Any other examples of startups which are doing something interesting which you have come across? It would be great to know some more examples from you.
Absolutely. So I've got these young guys that I mentor and advise who run a startup called Need Energy. They were listed last year by the World Energy Council as one of the top 15 energy startups in the entire world. And we've seen this happen. I mean, we've seen it happening in fintech. If you look at what's happening in West Africa, fintech platforms such as Flutterwaves, they're really, really taking Africa and the world by storm. So there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the financial services space, in the health services space. In Uganda, for example, there's MScan Uganda. They're developing mobile ultrasound scanning devices that are being used in Uganda. So there are a lot of these technologies. I could list a lot more, in agri-tech, in health tech, in clean tech, in so many other facets of the economy where African startups. There's a Zimbabwean startup by the name of Flex ID. They're a blockchain based digital identity startup, and they're doing work internationally for international entities. I'll mention another one in Zimbabwe. There's a global outsourcing company in Zimbabwe called Zimworks that is doing work for international firms. So we are beginning to see that acceptance of technology, where technology is being mainstreamed into the day-to-day lives of Africans to solve most pressing challenges that are being faced by Africa.
Right. That's excellent. In fact, Prechard, what I may request you to do is, if you can share me offline a list of such resources, right? It could be some interesting startups which you come across, or any more resources or websites where people could check about, the African startup or entrepreneur, kind of resources, or any other resources which you may like. So I'll kind of add it into a presentation which can be shared in the show call notes, right? So people have a reference to check that as well. Great. So coming to the last point, what would be the fifth trend which you feel is important for people to know?
So the last trend is actually connected to your request for information, and I think data is the new gold, but it's not being adequately mapped in Africa. So much that the opportunities that exist are not sitting on a dashboard where people can view them and see that, oh, this is what's happening in Nigeria, this is what's happening in Kenya, this is what's happening in Egypt, Tanzania, South Africa, and all across the 54 different African countries. So the bigger trend now is that people are moving it towards big data, AI, and having a much more concerted effort to try and curate, to try and collect, curate, and make available certain very important pieces of data that have for a very long time remained hidden. So, for example, if you want to check information regards where the most health tech startups are in Africa, you're not going to find that online. So data is where a lot of things are going, where people are beginning to curate and collect. Much of it is not yet available, but there's still room for a lot more players to come in and collect as well as curate data so that it becomes available and can be used for decision making, and can be used to plan economies, and can be used to attract investment as well as to attract support, whether it be support in terms of mentorship, guidance, or just even to show an example. I know, for example, India recently sent was it a rocket that they sent to the moon?
It was a lander to the moon.
Yeah. So for us to be able to then tap into some of that knowledge, maybe they don't know, that there's a space agency in Zimbabwe. Yes, they haven't sent anyone to space, but they've only sent a satellite with the support of the Japanese government. But there's a lot of these things that are happening that are, you just can't search and say at the click of a button. So the fifth trend for me is that data is gold, and whoever is able to curate it, collect it, curate it, will definitely be able to monetize it going forward.
Right. So have you seen any kind of examples wherein a very important vertical, let's say oil and gas or agriculture or things like that, which becomes the anchor for this whole data and information gathering, and then that kind of leads to accelerated growth? Have you come across any such kind of movement or improvement in this area regarding to data collection?
Absolutely. So the startup that I mentioned earlier, which is called Need Energy, they are an AI-powered energy resource management startup, and they are collecting so much data from the deployments that they're making, and that data is being put to help in terms of planning, energy resource requirements, planning, and projecting, the gaps that exist. So they're just one that I'm mentioning of the many other players that are using data, AI, even in agriculture, to map what's happening. You find that some of the mapping, for example, in my country, some of the mapping that had been done to divide agriculture land into regions was done so many years ago. But now there's a deliberate and intentional effort to map the resources, to find where they are, to map the potential, to use that data to be able to attract resources into some of those spaces where where gaps are being noticed.
Great. Thanks, Prechard. This gives a great perspective. And thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in. We'll have a presentation in the show called Notes, which would have the various links and resources which Prechard mentioned. Do subscribe, share, and like this podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and other channels. Bye for now. Talk to you soon.